Yeah, good morning, oh, so that's good morning, India. Sorry. Good morning, everyone. This is Farzana here, and we are very pleased to have with us today Danila Serra. Danila is an associate professor at Texas A&M in the Department of Economics and the Bush School of Government and Public Service. Her areas of research are economics of corruption, more broadly, development economics, and experimental economics with focus on gender. And for those of you, especially the students here, she's also the founder of the Adopt a Paper program, which has many takers now and is also being replicated in other places. Danila, we're very happy to have you. Thank you so much for accepting the invitation. And today, Danila is going to talk about gender and leadership in organizations. We have 1.5 hours. We'll go until it would be 10:30 India time, right, Debashish?
It will be,
Yeah,
yeah,
9 to
10:15.
10:30.
So
And
75 minutes, 75 minutes, but she can take longer if she wants.
okay. And Danila, would you like to take questions as you go along, or you want them all at the end of the talk?
No, feel free to ask questions, especially when I'll spend some time in the design on the design.
Okay.
Make sure that ask me questions so that everything is clear before I move on to the results, especially.
Okay. Great. Yeah. So then the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. First of all, let me thank you for having me virtually. This is joint paper with Priyanka Chakraborty, which is a former student at SMU, and now she's at Allegheny College. I'm just gonna first of all give you some motivation and then dive into the research questions. Um, so the first part of the motivation, or at least what motivated us to look into these questions, the research question that is clearly stated in the title of the paper, is that there's a lot of literature in different fields, spanning from politics to business and academia, and also lots of experimental evidence, a growing set of experimental evidence showing that women in a position of leaderships tend to be judged more harshly, more critically, and get more backlash as compared to men in a position of leadership. And as the experiments in particular are able to clearly hold performance constant. So for any kind of behavior or performance, there is evidence that women are judged more harshly. Some of the studies you might be familiar with, for example, the ones that have to do with academia. There are studies showing that female professors get lower student evaluations than male professors. There is evidence that women tend to get less credit for group work, and for example, co-authored papers when co-authored with men tend to penalize your chances of getting tenure or not count as much as if you were a man. So you might also be familiar with the Biman et al. Study, which is from India's development paper about female leaderships and how female leaders, council heads, were judged negatively by constituents. So there's definitely evidence that this is the case, right? And there's also so this was something that we were thinking about when starting to design the experiment and formulate our research question. The other strand of the literature that motivated us, and it's not as large, but there is basically also some evidence that would suggest that women are more sensitive to negative feedback, or they are more sensitive to public scrutiny. So there are some studies that show that. And in particular, if we focus on male-dominated fields or stereotypically male tasks, it is especially evident that women are more discouraged than men when they get negative feedback. So keeping both of these strands of the literature in mind, I'm gonna just clearly state our research questions, and then I'll give you some more literature review. So the first questions that we want to ask is whether knowing that if you're a woman, you are going to face more backlash potentially, or more harsher backlash. Could that be a reason why women are less likely to select into leadership positions? So could this anticipation of backlash or harsher backlash be keeping some women out of leadership positions? So that's the first question. So we're interested in selection into leadership, and whether the possibility of backlash and harsher backlash affects that self-selection process for women differently than for men. Then we're also interested in how men and women behave when they are in a position of leadership. So we care about, or we want to study whether want to study gender differences in managerial behavior or leadership behavior. And I'm going to go into the details of what we mean specifically by that. We also care about communication. Leaders. One of the things that leaders do, and of course it depends on different contexts, but communication with followers, with subordinates, if you're thinking of manager and employees. So communication has an important role, and we want to understand whether leaders, male and female leaders, communicate and motivate their followers differently. And then finally, we are going back full circle to our first strand of the literature, and we're asking, is it true in our setting that I'm gonna present to you in a second, is it true that followers respond differently to female versus male leaders? Is it true that they criticize female leaders more than male leaders? So these are our four crucial research questions, and this is the another piece of motivation, and this goes straight into the gender leadership gap. So here I'm just it's very US centric. I'm sorry about that, but basically I'm just providing some statistics that show the existence of a leadership gap in the private sector, in politics, in academia. In academia, for example, while about half of the assistant professors are women, the proportion, that's what we call the leaky pipeline, the proportion becomes smaller and smaller as we move from assistant to associate to full professors. And in economics, the percentage of full professors who are women is less than 15%. So there is evidence of this gender gap. There are missing women in positions of leadership. So this is an important problem. And I want to specify, what we are trying to say here is not that, the mechanism, this anticipation of backlash is the primary reason why we see the gap. It's not what we're arguing here, but we are trying to see whether it could contribute to the leadership gap, to the gender leadership gap. This is my one. Of course.
Yeah. So, the first research question that you posed, which was whether the possibility of critical evaluation might cause selection into leadership positions. Are there some, you would expect that there would be some variation across different professions in the probability of having critical evaluations or backlash, let's say, which vary by gender. So for instance, it could be that in the corporate or the private sector, women might be subject to that more than, let's say, if you're in government or in academia. So is that something that you would be taking into account in terms of the design, or is there any literature on that?
No, this issue of self-selection, and so how, as I say, there is evidence that the difference exists, that women are criticized more harshly, and this is true in different fields. This idea that the existence of gender differences in backlash could create a selection problem, and so could prevent women from self-selecting into leadership, that is not something that has been studied, or at least we are not aware of. So we're kind of, we think, at least, we don't know if what papers tell us. So there isn't much done specifically on this question. And so I will tell you specifically what we do in the experiment, what kind of environment we are trying to simulate or to to reflect in the experiment. So where we are going to use a frame that is leadership in organizations. So we are looking at behaviors of managers, so decision to become a manager when you have to deal with employees. So we are going to frame it in that way. The extent to which the problem exists to different extents in different sectors. I'm sure that is a valid point, that that there must be differences, and it depends also on how many people are below you, how many people can criticize you, and what kind of decisions you can make to affect others positively or negatively. That's going to be a crucial element of our design. So I'm sure that there are these kind of nuances. I'm not sure that a lot is being done to study all these dimensions of the problem. I don't know if I answered your question. I feel like I talked a lot and maybe little substance, lots of words and little substance, but yes, I'm not aware of something that studies that specifically. So this is my one slide of literature, so I'm not going to spend much time on it, but I just wanted to show you that for each of these research questions that we have, there is definitely related literature. So for example, there are studies that somehow we can think are relevant for the decision to become a leader. There are studies that have highlighted behavioral constraints that women face more than men. For example, studies that highlight gender difference in competitiveness or risk preferences, bargaining tendencies. So there are lots of studies that we can think, okay, well, if there's a gender difference in competitiveness, that might affect the decision to self-select into managerial position, self-stereotyping might play a role. So there are gender differences that have been identified in the past that might play a role here as well. But we haven't found any paper that specifically looks at this constraint, this anticipation of negative feedback or backlash, and what that specifically can do, or what role that can play in the decision to self-select into a leadership role. And then this other literature here, so the second bullet point, gender differences in managerial or executive performance. So there's quite a lot of literature that looks at differences in outcomes when you have more women in an executive boards, for example. And usually these are like, data from Nordic countries where there are like natural experiments, like unexpected shocks or unexpected laws that impose some requirements in terms of quotas to be met for executive boards. The evidence is mixed. There's quite a lot of evidence showing that having more women in executive boards actually might lower at least short-term profits for a firm. So there is evidence of some negative effects. On the other hand, there is also quite a lot of evidence and increasing evidence that having more women on the board might also have some positive impacts. For example, there is a higher likelihood of promotions for women. If there are more women at the top, there is also a higher likelihood of granting some wishes to work part-time, for example, so that might increase well-being of workers. So, it's also difficult to draw conclusions, even though there are some survey paper in there. We cite a bunch of stuff in the paper. It's difficult to draw conclusions because, of course, these are applied micro paper. These are, they use different kinds of data. They look at different outcomes. So they're not immediately comparable, even if some, show evidence of positive impacts, others of negative impacts on the outcome of interest. In terms of the third bullet point, there is very little work done in economics looking at differences in the language of communications of leaders toward followers, gender difference I'm talking about. There is quite a lot of literature in organizational management and psychology showing that that men and women use different kinds of languages, and they two experimental studies that we're aware of that I'm citing here, these are lab experiments, They confirm that large body of literature that basically shows that men tend to be more assertive than women, women in a position of leadership, and women tend to use language that is more conducive to team building, for example, like, you know, nice words and complimentary words, so more supportive. So this is, and then of course the fourth bullet point, so the first research question, I already touched on that literature in the first slide, so I'm not gonna repeat myself. So what I'm gonna do next, so I'm gonna soon I'm gonna go into the details of the experiment, but first I wanted to give you a flavor of what the experiment is mimicking, the kind of environment that the experiment is simulating. So what we are thinking of is a work environment where there is a leader, a manager that has discretion over the assignment of, you know, tasks or bonuses, job promotions. And the crucial aspect of this environment is that the manager decision-making affects the earnings of a set of workers. And so think of a situation, I always make this, I mean, I think it's very relatable to think of a department head and, you know, professors. And, you know, at least in the US, every year that you have an evaluation, yearly evaluation, and the department head would decide whether you get a bonus or a raise. And, you know, some people are going to get bonuses and raises and others are not going to get them, or not as much. And so the people that don't get the bonus or they don't get the promotions might get upset because of it, right? And crucially, what we want to simulate is an environment where this is not a one-shot interaction. It is not that, you know, this manager decides your bonus or your earnings this year and that's it, and then you change, you're going to have another person and that you're going to meet next year. No, the department chair is there for 5 years, 6 years, 10 years. And so every year the department chair will face the same employees, and that's important. So the department chair might feel bad if, you know, this year after year has to tell you that you don't get the bonus while somebody else got the bonus. So in all of these cases, in all these examples I'm making, some workers are going to be better off than others, or better than others, right? So some get the promotion, others don't. Some get the bonus, others don't. Crucially, the manager is in the best possible position. We want the manager to be the highest possible earner. And so the question that we're asking in this environment is, who wants to be manager? And how are these promotion or bonuses decisions made and final outcomes determined? And importantly, this is a paper about gender, so we want to know whether there are gender differences in the decision or willingness or desire to be the manager in this framework. And also if there are gender differences in the actions of men and women when they become managers. Is there a question? No?
No, no question.
Okay, so just in case some of you have to go before the end of the seminar, I'm just gonna give you a snapshot of the main results so you know what's coming. So in this environment, what we find is that there is a gender difference in self-selection. Women are less likely to want to be manager, but this gender difference only emerges if employees can send them negative backlash, negative feedback in the form of angry messages. And I'm going to tell you how we simulate those angry messages in the context of the experiment. Also, is it true that female managers get more backlash? Yes. In our setting, we confirm what's been shown before. We do find that employees are more likely to question the decision of female managers, and they also send them more angry messages. What about the behaviors of male and female managers? Are those different? Yeah, we do see some differences. So I'm going to go into the details of those differences. But overall, so if we think of final outcomes, profits, we don't see any significant differences there in final outcomes. We do find difference in communication that confirms very much the existing literature. So we see that the men are more assertive and women are more supportive. But at the same time, a crucial aspect, a crucial result that I personally find very interesting is that we find that this gender differences in communication in language only emerges under the possibility of backlash. So women and men use different language to communicate with their workers only if there is a threat of backlash. And so the different language seems to be a different strategy to minimize the possibility of backlash. So we'll go into what that means. We'll go into the details of that.
Daniela, this is Abhirup here. I just had a question. So when a woman is thinking about whether they want to be a manager, is there a consideration that that they're thinking about what would it be if they remained employees in terms of how the let's say I decide not to be a manager, but that means that someone else would be the manager who would be nasty to me. Does that consideration also go in? And if so, then what is the information structure? What does the woman know about, in some sense, who else would be the manager if she was not the manager?
Yes, so let me get into the details of the experiment.
Right, sorry.
So we'll go into
Just another question.
Yes.
Wouldn't it also be more likely that the self-selection effect would mean that the women who do become managers are much tougher than the others? I mean, than their male counterparts. So I mean, there is of course anecdotal evidence of Margaret Thatcher and Indira Gandhi and those kinds of things. You would expect, women who are managers to be much tougher.
We'll see what we find. You are just bringing a couple of examples, but there are lots of, there are other women in a position on leadership, and we don't really know at this point specifically how they're gonna compare to male managers. I mean, we have these applied micro studies that look at just overall outcomes. So here we have the advantage of the experiment that allows us to specifically measure their promotion decisions and their language. I mean, what they say. So we can, if that is your hypothesis, we can definitely test for that as well. So, but I'm gonna go into the details. I mean, this is just, I just wanted to give you a flavor of the environment and the results. But now, I'm gonna tell you specifically, the information structure, the payoff structures, and the treatments that we are running, so that you can have a better idea of why we're doing what we're doing and what we could expect to see or hypothesize that could happen based on different assumptions that we can make about preferences of men and women.
Tanya, a quick clarification question on the third point. Is that conditional on threat of worker backlash or unconditional? The profits, the results for profits?
Yeah, there are no differences in profits in any of the treatments. So with or without backlash.
I see. Okay, thanks.
So we'll go into that.
Regarding the second point, employees are more likely to question the decision of female managers. Is there a strategic element to it, or for example, employees might think that if they question those managers more, then women will grant them promotion in the next cycle, or
so we can test that. I'm not going to answer the question yet because we are not. I haven't shown you the full design, but that is something that we can see. So I told you already, this is a repeated game, and so we are able to see whether sending backlash is something that you want to do or not, and how men and women react to receiving backlash, not just anticipating backlash. Okay. So let me show you exactly how we did that. And so hopefully, like some of the questions that maybe you have, they are lingering in your head. I can answer those before we go into the results. So first of all, if you have done if you have conducted any experiment on gender, you will know that it is a challenge to conduct an experiment, a lab experiment on gender, because you want to make gender visible, but also you don't want to prime gender or make people think about gender too much. And so the key is to make gender visible, but not artificially salient. And so the way we do that in our experiment is we ask, so subjects come, this is a lab experiment, sorry, it wasn't clear. the lab experiment. So subjects come into the lab, to the computer lab, and they the first thing that they do when they sit at the computer, it's a short questionnaire, very standard. We just ask them for the age, gender, major, whether they participated in the experiment before. Now, based on that answer to the gender question, we then ask them to pick a fictitious name that will be their name for the duration of the experiment. And so that's the name that will represent them, and that's how we disclose gender, because then the name is going to be visible to other participants. So then what happens, stage one, we have students, the subjects participate in a real effort task. And this is a puzzle solving task that we created. And I'm gonna show it to you just here because I have a screenshot. So basically we show them puzzles, we call them, these are 6x6 matrices with letters. And they need to find a word. There are 40 words here. And so, for example, here you see tide, and tide is, I think it's here, number 37. So they have to enter 37 and submit. They have 5 minutes to do up to 20 puzzles, and they get a piece rate, so a fixed wage and then a piece rate. And stage one is just, to get familiar with the task. It's individual play. They don't even know that they're going to be played together with other participants. Then stage two is the crucial one. So that's when we form groups of 3, and we wanted to represent or simulate male-dominated environments. So we wanted to have more men than women. So ideally, we wanted groups of 1 woman and 2 men. That was the case in about 65% of the cases of the groups. They see the names of the other people, and then they are given instructions for the remaining 5 stages of the game. They know that they're gonna stay in the group for the duration of the experiment. And so that's the leadership experiment. So what happens in the leadership experiment, they are told that one of them will become the manager and the other 2 are gonna be workers in the game. And they're gonna keep those roles for the duration of the experiment. Now, the main task of the manager is to assign ranks to the 2 workers. So the manager basically sees the performances of the 2 workers in the previous stage. So say I am Anna in this game and I match with John and Alex. I see how many puzzles each of them solved. And crucially, I'm the only one who can see that. The workers cannot see each other productivity. And then I decide which worker is going to be rank A and which worker is going to be rank B. Rank A is the high earning worker, high wage worker. Rank B is the low wage worker. And then we do the task again. So we do another round of the puzzle solving task that generates a piece rate for all of us. The manager is the highest earner here. So the manager, and this is because we want to have a situation where everybody should want to be a manager. It pays to be a manager. The manager earns 100 ECU. The rank A 80, the rank B 80. So their exchange rate is 6 ECU, experimental currency units per $1. And then they do the puzzle task. They can solve a maximum of 20 puzzles, and so earn an additional 40 ECU. Now, another important aspect of this payoff configuration is that the manager also earns money from the productivity of rank A worker only. Okay, so this is to give an incentive to the manager to pick the highest, the best worker, basically to assign rank A to the best worker. Okay. Now, crucially, so they do this at the beginning of stage 2. So the manager, one person becomes a manager. How, who, depends on the treatment. So I'm going to tell you how. The person becomes a manager, assigns ranks, they do the task. At the end of that stage, at the end of stage 2, the manager sees the productivity of rank A and rank B in the previous stage, Alex and John, and can keep ranks or switch ranks. So it can switch the ranks or keep as they are. And the experiment continues for 4 more rounds. So this is the timeline. Name, choice of name, first effort task. The manager is in a group now, assigns ranks, real effort task. The manager decides whether to keep or switch ranks, real effort task, and go. This keeps going. The manager is always the same, okay? So the manager doesn't change. Once you are the manager of your group, you stay with the group and you're always going to be the manager, and you are the ones that has to make 5 decisions, 5 rank assignments, okay, for the same 2 workers. So that's important. Hopefully that's clear. Now, now the treatments determine how we choose the manager. So in the baseline is then in the no choice treatment, the best performer in stage 1 becomes the manager. Okay, so subjects do not know this in stage 1. Stage 1 is the stage where they just work independently from each other. We didn't want to create competition at that stage. We don't want to create anxiety or have confidence play a role, because we don't care about that in this setting. We just care about backlash, right? That's the important element that we want to isolate. So manager is chosen among the best performance randomly. It's either the best, or if more than one, it's randomly. Then we start adding elements. So in the choice treatment, this is where we allow for self-selection. So we tell subjects the rules of the game at the beginning of stage 2, right? So you're in a group with Alex and John. This is what's going to happen. One of you is going to become a manager, all the payoffs. So we tell them how much they're going to earn, depending on their rank, depending on whether they're a manager or not. And then we say, do you want to be the manager of your group? So that's the self-selection decision. And among those who say yes, we choose the manager based on performance in stage 1. This the same way as we did for the no choice treatment. Okay, that's the simplest possible self-selection treatment. Then we add communication to this. So we add one-way communication. So this is the situation where the manager or the department chair has to meet you and kind of tells you why you didn't get the bonus or whatever. Like, you know, there's a meeting, so the manager needs to give you feedback. So this is what happens in choice of talk. So we tell you, the manager needs to also send a message to rank A and rank B at each allocation stage. Okay, so at the beginning of each stage, you assign rank and you send a message to A, send a message to B. No feedback back is allowed in this treatment. And then finally, we add one more piece, which is message back from the worker and backlash. So this is the choice and backlash treatment, which is our key treatment, the one that we really care about. So here, everything is the same. It's choice and talk. Manager sends you a message, and now you can send a message back. So this is chat, free-form message. You can write whatever you want. In addition to that, the rank B worker can send up to 5 angry emojis to show disapproval with the ranking decision. Okay, so all of this is say to them, you know, everything, payoff, emojis, chat, and then do you want to be the manager of your group? Among those who say yes, we select based on performance in stage 1. Once the manager is selected, that's going to be the manager of the group for the duration of the experiment. Okay, and so then the manager makes multiple decisions. Crucially, I want to make it clear that the manager is the only one who sees the performances of the 2 workers. The workers only see their own absolute performance. They don't know what the other worker is doing. And so they don't have perfect information about what the manager is doing, why the manager is choosing the other worker over them, or why the manager is choosing them. Okay.
Janila,
so this is
one
yes.
question. So
yes.
in this idea that the person with the highest kind of score in your, you know, in the test is chosen as the manager, I mean, somewhere it misses the fact that you know, in contrast, you know, if the manager was chosen on the basis of being a fair person, right? Because the skill that you're asking of the person to do in the game is not the skill on the basis of which you are making the manager, right? So you're making the manager on pure ability to do a task, whereas the task that the manager has to do in some sense is just, I mean, what society or workers may care about is being fair in some sense, to rank properly, or, you know. So why I'm saying is that in many real life situations, that's where there might be a difference in the way employees look at managers, because they may feel that the manager is so they may be more willing to accept negative outcomes if they feel or they have some prior that the manager is a fair manager, right? So this is an aspect that is in some sense would be missing in a game like this, right? That
Yes. Yeah, no. So we are thinking qualifications are important and beliefs about qualifications are important for backlash. So you're thinking of fairness, and here, what we're coming from is that we're assuming that at least in real life, ability and skills somehow are not a perfect predictor of your ability to climb the career ladder and go to the top. But we certainly believe that there is some of that. So we want some qualifications to matter to reflect the fact that becoming a manager is somehow dependent on skills or ability. But crucially, the reason we did it this way is because we did not want to have this other confound of beliefs about the manager's ability. So you might think there is some evidence showing that the women might get more backlash because workers believe that they are not qualified to be their manager, or that they are better than the manager, right? So if that would be a reason to give backlash, and you believe that the manager is not as good, it's not good enough, the manager should not be the manager is not qualified to be the manager, and that kind of gives you immunity to give negative feedback to the manager, backlash. And so we wanted to abstract from that and say, well, everybody knows that the manager is qualified. Everybody knows that the manager is the best performing person, so whether a man or a woman. So that's what we were worried about. We didn't want to have the beliefs about the qualifications of manager to play a role in the decision to backlash, or in gender difference in backlash. And in general, like, I'm not sure in real life what matters, probably both, how fair you think your chair is versus how qualified the manager is or the chair is to judge everybody's papers and decide who is better and who deserves the promotion. Definitely, there are lots of dimensions in the decision to assign ranks or bonuses that might matter and might affect backlash. But I definitely believe that beliefs about qualifications of the managers are important, especially for the gender
You didn't
difference.
try a treatment where the group nominates a manager, right?
No. There are some studies about that. So there is some work about choosing the choice of leaders, and there is definitely evidence of a gender difference there, that women are selected less often to be leaders themselves, and also they put themselves less often up for promotion in that sense. So there is evidence on that. Like, what is novel, I think, about our study is the focus on backlash.
Yeah, I know, but those studies, if I remember, don't have this repeated kind of backlash structure, and that's what I'm wondering whether those results would still go through. I mean, those structures are where you basically.
I mean, that would be even stronger. Like, even without backlash, there is a gender difference. Even without backlash, women are less likely to be selected as leaders of a group when there is a vote. So, if anything, I think this would.
All right.
The gender gap. So here, let me explain to you why we chose specifically these treatments. So here is our way of thinking about it. So in the choice treatment, there is no backlash and there is no communication, but there could still be a gender gap and emerging if you think that there is some evidence showing that there is a gender difference in inequality aversion, and the women are like more averse to inequality, and so maybe they don't want to feel responsible for generating inequality, or as somebody was saying before, I don't remember who, maybe they want to be in charge to reduce inequality. So that would predict that women maybe want to be manager more for that reason, or it could be that they don't want to generate inequality, and so they might be less willing to be managers. So any gender differences in this inequality aversion, willingness to be responsible for inequality, might already create a gender gap in self-selection. Now, once we introduce feedback, if you think that it's uncomfortable to have to say to the same worker again and again, you are rank B, and communicate that, and the chair has to say the same to you again and again every year. You don't get a bonus, you don't get a raise. It might be uncomfortable, and if this willingness to provide feedback is if there is a gender difference in that, then we will imagine that a gender gap in self-selection emerges here, or this greater here than there, because the only thing changes between these two treatments is feedback, giving feedback. And then finally, once we add the backlash, of course, that adds, that's the crucial aspect of the study. So we want to understand whether the possibility of backlash, the anticipation of backlash, widens the gender gap if it existed, or it creates a gender gap if it did not exist before. So that's why we did it. We did it this way, and that's how.
Leila, one question. Sorry,
yes.
You said that the performance in the various tasks are known to the manager, but the other workers don't know how each other do, right?
Yes.
So in the first stage, when you decide to be people are deciding to be managers in a group, is the performance of each other known in that test?
No,
not even that.
Only yours.
So the consideration I was thinking of, which was basically that you choose to be a manager because you don't want the other person to be a manager because the person may be of low ability, that kind of consideration is not going to come into play. Like, so one way you can think, I mean, of course, you can say that in the gender difference, it should not matter because in some sense, those tests will cancel out. But as a decision of a manager or to be a manager, you would expect that, let's say that I score low, or whatever, I have some consideration. But then I see these other two people and I see that they're really bad. And if their scores are correlated with their managerial activity, which is the assumption here, they would do a really bad job. And therefore I, nominate myself as being a manager. So that's not something that will go into your thing.
No,
okay.
No, here you only see your own. I mean, your point still, if you think that if there is a gender difference, so if you're a woman, you think that the man care less about inequality, for example, and you care about the workers, still just knowing the gender of the other person might induce you to want to be a manager, to compensate for that, or to avoid to stop a man for being a manager. So in a sense, that could also still be there, but not to the extent you were thinking about, probably.
All right.
The other thing is that we want to abstract from preferences for competition as well. So just, remember the manager is the highest earner worker. So everybody should want to be a manager, just caring about monetary payoffs, or like money maximizer. And also, this is not like a competition and like the Niederlehmann-Westerlund kind of thing, because here, if you do not become a manager, you're just a worker. It's the same as if you didn't want to be a manager. So that's also important. It's the same in all the treatments.
But you would want to be worker A rather than worker B, right? So
no, of course, but that's not up to you. But I'm saying the decision preferences for competitiveness should not. Somebody can say, oh well, women are less competitive, and so they might not want to be a manager, or to say that they want to be a manager, because in a sense, the manager is chosen among those who say that they want to be manager. But in this case, contrary to a competition game like those that are used, usually if you do not become a manager, you don't lose anything, right? It's not, so my decision, there is no risk in saying I want to be a manager, right? Because, the worst that can happen to you is that you said you want to be a manager, but you don't become one, and then you're just a worker, which is what you would have been anyway.
I see.
So this was done at SMU, Southern Methodist University, my previous institution, and we had about 400 students participating in the experiment. And remember that these the groups are independent from each other. Groups of 3 participants, they only interact between them, and so each group is an independent observation. But these are the numbers of groups we have, and these are the number of men and women that we have. This is if you were wondering about who are the students, and so we are doing some balance tests here. comparing men and women, but also in the paper we report for statistically significant differences in demographics among the treatment within each treatment. And so I just wanted to give you an idea of these students, because these students are not definitely representative of the American student population. For example, you know, the majority of them have already self-selected into a major that leads to leadership. So they are STEM, business and economics majors. So you see there is a gender gap. Obviously, there are like more men than women in these fields, but also the percentage of women that are in these fields is very high. It's like the majority. So even the women, you know, if we're thinking how does this sample represent the general population, if anything, this sample is skewed toward already a preference for leadership. And so if we do find, the way we're thinking about it is that if we do find some gender differences here in this selected sample, it might be even larger if we were conducting a similar study with the general population. The other thing that I wanted to, so what did we ask? This is in the questionnaire that we asked at the very end. We measured the Big Five personality index of agreeableness, because in the management literature that's been correlated with leadership aspiration, and this is an index that higher number means that you're more agreeable, lower number you're more competitive or aggressive, and men are usually score lower. That's true also in our sample. So that confirms what we know already. We asked if they've been in a leadership position in the past. Most in high school or college, most of the students said yes. And then this is whether they are native speaker. And so we think this is important because for the task is a language task. And this is the only variable where we see a significant difference across treatments, both for men and women. For some reason, in the choice and talk treatment, we have more native speakers, but we control for, in our most comprehensive specification, we control for all of these. So, I forgot to tell you, like, why did we choose this task specifically? And this is reminding me of that. So we chose a language task and not a math task because we wanted to abstract from the self-confidence, the gender difference in self-confidence that has been shown to exist, especially in stereotypically male tasks. In the language tasks, usually there is no gender difference in self-confidence. There is also no gender difference in competitiveness. And so we wanted a language task, and we wanted a task where we would see men and women perform equally well. So no gender difference in performance. And this is exactly what we see here. So I'm using this table also to get you familiar with the kind of specification we will use in the study. I don't have a slide with it's very straightforward. So I don't have the slide with the empirical specification. But basically here we are having the 3 treatments: no choice, choice and talk, and choice and backlash. Choice is the excluded one, the excluded treatment. We're having the female dummy, and then we're interacting each one of them, each of the treatment with the female dummy. So this gives me the impact of the treatments on men. Here we are looking at whether there is an impact of the treatments on performance in the task, the number of cortisol puzzles, and there is none. This is the female dummies. You can see there isn't a gender difference in the task, in the choice treatment, and this tells me the differential impact of the treatment on women. There is none. And then importantly, this is going to be something that we're going to be looking at in the tables, in all the tables, because these are the tests of determining the impact of the treatments on females. And here we have just like some evidence, probably capturing the native speakers here that seems to be doing better in the choice and talk, which was where we had that imbalance. But overall, I think we were pretty successful in choosing a task that was gender balanced, or that where we didn't see gender differences to start with. So this is result number 1. So this is basically our primary result here that has to do with self-selection into leadership. So you see the results for men. So you have choice, choice and talk, choice and backlash. Virtually all men want to be managers, and they don't care whether they have to give feedback or receive feedback. Now here you have same for women in choice and talk. Virtually all women want to be managers. There is no gender difference. And here you can, if you're interested in the p-values from non-parametric tests, you have them here. So there is no gender differences in choice and talk. And then there is a significant gender difference in choice and backlash, which is where we see this drop, significant drop. This is the p-value for it, where women become less wanting, less willing to be manager, or they don't want to be manager as much. This is confirmed by regression analysis. So that's the same specification as before, except that we don't have the baseline. So we just have choice and talk and choice and backlashes compared to choice. And these are the important results here. So this is the impact of choice and backlash as compared to control. But more importantly, this is the comparison that we really care about, which is choice and talk versus choice and backlash. So that's where the only thing changing is the backlash. And we see this significant decline in wanting to be manager for women, okay? So this is just, sorry, I didn't even say, this is just linear probability model. So you can see more clearly the magnitude of the effect. What else can I say here? Here. This is something maybe that you were thinking about when I mentioned that participants don't really see each other's performance in the task before deciding whether to want to be managers, right? So they don't see what others did. Performance in the task in the first stage should not matter, because as we said, everybody should want to be manager. You also don't know what others have done, so you don't know if you're better or worse. And in general, like, even if you're a manager, there's not really a competition going on. You don't risk anything or lose anything by being a manager. If anything, you can only gain. So the performance in the task in stage 1 should not matter. It turns out that in this regression, so we are not showing the coefficients for the controls, but it turns out that if we do this for men and women separately, performance in stage 1 does matter for women. And so it doesn't matter for men, but so here what I want to show you is basically dividing the sample in bottom, middle, and top performers. Red are women and black are men. And here you have the decision, self-selection into managers, so women versus men. If you look at the men, where you stand, so whether you perform very poorly in the task, in the middle, or you are top performer. Top performer in this case means that you solve 20 out of 20 correctly. For men, doesn't really matter. And for women also doesn't matter that much unless you are in the backlash treatment. So if you are facing the possibility of backlash and you are a woman, it seems that the only way to close the gap is if you did 20 out of 20. And so you feel like, you're really good at this task and you feel like you can be the manager. If you did less than 20, that is when we see that gap. And so women seem to take that into consideration in their decision to want to be managers, while men don't care much. So now we go into what they do when they are managers, right? So gender difference in performance. So this is a little bit more complicated because we really try, we went through a huge revision of this paper, and we really tried as much as possible to look at different measures of performance or decision making. So the first thing that we look at is the first rank allocation that they make, right? So at the very beginning, first rank allocation, we want to know whether they assign rank to the best performer. It turns out that that's exactly what they do. About 95 to 100% of male and female managers, they just they assign rank A to the best performer in the previous stage. Then we care about the decision to switch, right? So they have 4 chances to switch ranks or keep ranks over time. So we want to understand whether there's a treatment effect. So there's more, the likelihood of switching increases when there's the possibility of backlash. And we also want to see whether those treatment effects are different for men and women.
Daniela?
Yes.
I have one question. Don't you think switching ranks is a more drastic decision compared to, you just want to promote someone and not promote someone? If you want to demote someone, isn't that a more, I don't know, more courageous decision, and women might, you might see more differences between men and women?
Yes. Here it's very drastic. So it's a zero-sum game. Like, you can't promote everybody, and there's only one top role, and so you have to choose who the person is going to be, who your assistant chair is going to be, and there's only one person that can be there. And it is possible that once you decide, so the idea here is like, you make the first decision, and then it might be uncomfortable to demote that person, but at the same time it might also be uncomfortable to keep telling the low rank person that is staying low rank. So we were thinking that, if anything, over time you'll feel compelled to switch ranks at some point, especially if you have to communicate with them, and especially if you're facing backlash. If you keep somebody in the same low rank role for a long time, that might induce you to promote that person at some point, even if it comes at the cost of the other person. Or you can imagine that in a work environment, you have more than 2 workers, and you have more than one role, one high role. So things are a little bit more complex. But here we are just basically amplifying whatever feelings you might have towards the low rank employee, basically. That's by in this setup. So hopefully, hopefully, it's possible that there are some dimensions of the problem that we are not capturing here, that we are emphasizing too much. But remember that we care about the treatment effects here, right? So everything, this is true in all the treatments. So we want to know what backlash is doing, in the possibility of backlash is doing in this setting. The other thing that we want to look at is the probability of making a mistake when assigning rank. So we call an ex post mistake the case where you assign rank A to a worker who ends up doing worse than the other worker. So that would be a mistake. And also that comes with a loss for you, a financial loss, because you make money out of the rank A worker. So if you chose the wrong person, that causes you a loss. So we look at foregone profits, and by the way, sorry, I am supposed to call it differently. These are foregone earnings for the manager due to mistaken rank allocation, and it's not profit for the firm. And then again, also these profits, sorry, I'm thinking, we're calling it profits because we're thinking of this environment that's value generating, and the value goes to the manager, which is representing the firm, and that's why we're thinking profits. But in reality, when we say profits, we're thinking really the earnings of the manager that are generated by the workers, so the value generated by the workers to the manager. And then this was a question that came up at the very beginning. So also it's possible that managers in the choice and backlash treatment, the male and female managers might react differently to the receipt of angry emojis, and they might end up react by promoting or demoting, promoting the worker, be more likely to promote the worker that send them an angry emoji, or it might be that they're going to be less likely to promote them if we see the angry emojis, and we don't have clear predictions about that in terms of the gender difference, but we'll test it. So this is what I already told you about the first rank allocation. So now I wanna show you a little bit what happened in terms of switching behavior. So the first thing here, remember that they could switch up to 4 times. There are 5 rounds, first rank allocation, and then they can switch up to 4 times. On average, across all treatments, women do switch more often. So men switch once, and women, I think it's 1.4, and it's statistically significant, the difference. But also, so here it shows a little bit what happens for male and female managers across treatments. And so the one thing for women that happens is, here you have the baseline when we basically, it's exogenous selection of managers, right? We choose the manager based on performance. This is when we allow for self-selection. If anything, there's less switching once you allow women to self-select. However, there is an increase for both men and women. This is just a qualitative, I'm going to show the regression. It seems that when people have to talk repeatedly to workers at the rank allocation stage, so when you have to give feedback, both men and women tend to switch ranks more. So they're kind of compelled at some point to give a chance to the other worker. This tendency increases further, seems to increase further for women, but not for men. So this is the first thing that, obviously we're going to see that in the regression analysis, but an important thing that I want you to look at is this other graph here. And I know there's lots of noise here, so just bear with me for a second. So here, what I'm showing you is the percentage of B workers who were switched, meaning they were promoted, conditional on their performance relative to the other workers' performance. So let's focus on the male managers. So let's forget about the difference between managers' gender. So this is telling me the percentage of B workers that were promoted if they performed worse than the other worker. Okay, so they didn't deserve to be promoted and they got promoted. This happens very rarely. It's just 10% of the cases. And this is true for both male managers and female managers. So it's kind of rare. It's not common at all. It's kind of rare to just switch workers without considering the relative performance and just out of fairness, for example, fairness motives. That's not what we see. Really, the switching, the promotions respond to relative performance. And so there's a significant increase in the likelihood of being promoted or being switched to rank A if you perform at least as well or better than A. And of course, in the regression analysis, we control for the difference in the performance of the two workers. Here we can't, obviously.
Janila, one more question. Sorry.
Yes.
Sorry for interrupting. So how do you say a decision would be fair in this setup? I mean, you can only, there's only one dimension, right? How would you say that a decision is looking at performance? And
if you are thinking of fairness as inequality aversion, and the fact that if you were thinking, oh, maybe in this environment you just keep switching arbitrarily and just give each worker a chance or equal chances without really looking at how they did, if you're only thinking of equalizing their chances, their opportunities, that in that way, that's how I use fair. That's what I was thinking. If we were thinking that an hypothesis could be that inequality aversion might lead managers to just arbitrarily switch ranks so that they feel like they're giving each worker equal chance without looking at their other performance. This is not what we see in the data.
Okay.
And then here also you see the same thing as here. So what happens is that if the manager has to talk to you, both men and women, we have a jump in the likelihood of being promoted if you perform better than the other worker. And this likelihood increases more for women. If anything, for men actually goes down. So here I'm going to show the same. So this is kind of the same, but in regression form. So here we have this usual stuff. This is the effect of talking, the giving feedback for men. As you can see, there is an increase in the likelihood of being promoted or switching workers rank. So that's at 0.1 for the manager. So that increases if a male manager has to talk. There is no gender difference. So the same happens for women and for women. So we look at the treatment effects on women here when we do the tests for the linear combination of the symmetric coefficients. And so here you see that in choice and talk, there is a significant increase in the likelihood of promoting the workers, controlling for relative, this is a relative performance, right? So if this is telling me that if the worker that was A previously performed better than you, there's less likely, there is this significant decrease in the likelihood of being switched. And so controlling for that, sorry, I just lost my train of thought for a second. We see that giving feedback, the choice and talk treatment, So there is a significant increase, but it's not, it's only significant 10%. Choice and backlash, definitely we see an increase in the likelihood of switching for women. So for men, it happens when you have to talk, to a less extent when you can receive backlash. For women, it happens when you have to talk, to a less extent, but to a more extent when there's also the possibility of receiving feedback, negative feedback or backlash. The second thing that, so there are some gender differences there. That's what I was mentioning in my results. So we see that there's both men and women are responding to the having to talk, to give feedback, and women respond more to the possibility of backlash and switch a little bit more, but there are not very pronounced gender differences here, as you can see. So there's some evidence of a gender gap in that, in the response, but not as much in the switching. Here we're looking at the percentages of mistakes. So again, a mistake, we define a mistake as the situation where you hire somebody, or you assign rank A to somebody who ends up doing worse than the rank B worker, right? So that would be a mistake in rank allocation. And so we also see not really a gender difference. We see a decrease in mistakes for women when we allow for self-selection versus external impulse. So self-selection improves the performance, if we think of this as a measure of performance. For men, isn't much here, but then if anything, the possibility of backlash reduces the likelihood of mistakes for men. And so if there is a gender gap here on the backlash, this is not really due to women making more mistakes, but it's due to men making fewer mistakes. And this is what we see here. So there's some evidence, not very strong evidence, that men are making fewer mistakes under choice and backlash. And there is a gender difference here, but again, if we look at the impact of the treatments on women, the treatments don't, except for the difference between exogenous assignment of managerial role versus self-selection. So that's significant, as the same as in the figure, but otherwise the treatments are not really doing much to mistakes for women, although we do see this gender difference that is caused by the men really becoming better, or like making fewer mistakes. Now, since switching behavior, as I showed you before, really is responsive to relative performance of the two workers, and so there is not really arbitrary switching, even when the mistakes happen, really the difference in the two workers is small. And so when we are thinking of the loss, the foregone profits, or the foregone earnings that are due to the mistakes, really those are small. So these are in ECU, it's like 2 ECU. So it's really small, and there's not really much of a difference between men and women or across treatments. And you see this clearly here: no effect on men, no effect on, no gender difference, no effect on women. So there is not really a treatment impact on loss, on economic loss or gender difference. And again, I should change this into earnings rather than profits. So here, what I'm telling you is, there were 5 rounds where they were making decisions, and in the regression analysis, we could exploit the full dimension of the data and the repeating nature of these interactions. Here we are looking at total earnings for the managers as generated by the rank A workers, and also maybe we are interested in the inequality between the earnings of the two workers. If we're thinking that switching, there's a little bit more switching in some treatments, and maybe that reduces inequalities between the total earnings of the two workers. It turns out that that is the case, and under backlash specifically, the inequality for female managers, inequality between the two workers decreases indeed, significantly so, as compared to at least choice and control and the control treatment. And for the male managers, so if we're looking at earnings, we don't see a gender difference, impact treatments on female managers, but here what we see is that impact of making fewer mistakes for the male managers under the choice and backlash that allows them to increase their earnings significantly over the 5 rounds. So it's kind of beneficial for them, but still not significant gender difference. But maybe we are underpowered to find one, given that we are aggregating the data. The one thing that we note in the paper, maybe you were thinking about it already, is that if you remember, we have a situation in the lab where by design we wanted to have more men than women to simulate a male-dominated environment. And so one thing that people have asked us is, okay, well, maybe the gender composition of the group affects the decision of women or men to become to want to become managers. Now, we take that into account in the regression analysis. So we do control in the regression for the composition of the group, and that doesn't seem to matter. We also cluster the standard errors at the group level to take that into account, among other things, and it doesn't seem to matter. But here we go a step further, and we basically restrict the samples to the groups that were identical, where there was just one woman and two men, just to see if we see kind of the same pattern in terms of treatment effects. And of course, there is more noise because we are keeping 65% of the sample. And so the sample is small, it's more noise, but as you can see, this is basically the same pattern. Like the only time where we see a drop is when there is backlash. The other thing that we do in the paper, but again, I don't want to emphasize this too much because the sample decreases. But the other thing that is important to note, and that would deserve, I think, a further study to be studied properly, is that because of this composition of the sessions, you know, where we had more men, it is also true that if a woman becomes manager, more likely she will be dealing with two male workers. And if a man becomes manager, more likely she is going to be dealing with one man and one woman. Now, this is true also in reality. So this is something that reflects the reality of managerial positions for women. However, of course, maybe some of the differences in managerial behavior and responsive, like, you know, more switching under backlash, maybe have to do with this difference in the composition of the group. So as a robustness check, we focus on groups where managers, both men and women, were just dealing with one man and one woman. So that's kind of, we keep that constant. Of course, that's a restricted sample. And so I cannot say much about statistical significance, you know, but if we look at the size of the estimated coefficients, at least they're very much comparable, and we don't see, you know, we don't see any crazy thing going on. But of course, in terms of statistical significance, we might be underpowered to detect that. And so that, you know, would be great to, I mean, who knows, maybe referees will ask us to work on that and collect more data to really look into how the gender composition of the group affects managerial behavior. Now, how am I doing time-wise? Okay, I still have time, right?
You have 15 more minutes, yeah.
Okay, great. So I personally, you know, I'm really interested in this part of the paper because it's the first time I work on something like this on language specifically. So remember, managers could talk to workers both in the choice and talk and choice and backlash treatment. So we did text analysis and categorized these messages based on the content. The most common contents were praising messages like, you know, you are a powerhouse, amazing work, you're doing great. Motivating, keep it up, you got this. Explaining the rank allocation, so great, did better. Competition inducing, your coworker scored you, earn your spot back, good job. Roger is catching up, so keep it up. Fairness, trying to be fair and switch it up. Team building, where you just refer to the group as a group, as a we. Again, this is the manager talking. And then just like a nice word like sorry or thank you, and just being nice. So then we are just looking at the percentage of messages that belong to each of these categories over the 5 rounds for male and female managers by the 2 treatments. So first of all, I'd like you to point your attention to the choice and backlash treatment. Okay, the choice and backlash treatment, so what we're looking at, just pointing out the significant differences. So we look at the frequency of cordial words, like nice words, and you see that female managers seem to use them more often. The other significant difference is that male managers are more likely to send messages that induce competition among the workers. Male managers are more likely to explain the rank allocation. And female managers are more likely to be praising the workers, like you're a star, you're doing so well, like very much supportive messages. So these results taken on their own, they really confirm the literature, what we know from the literature. Women are more, female managers, more supportive language, men are more assertive, stronger, like putting workers against each other. It's very much in line with what we know. But the interesting part here is that if we look at the choice and talk treatment, which is, when workers cannot talk back to you, so you're just sending a message and there is no risk of backlash. Let's look at cordial. If anything, it is the male managers that are using nicer words, that are being more cordial. There is no difference in what competitive. Yes, there's some evidence there, but not significant difference. But also there is no evidence that women are more supportive, as in like more praising of the employees. The only difference that stays is the fact that the men are more like explaining more why they did what they did. But any kind of gender differences in, assertiveness, supportiveness, those only emerge in the presence of backlash, which seems to suggest that really those are not kind of innate ways or intrinsic differences in the way male and female managers communicate or motivate their employees, but rather the differences emerge because men and women adopt different strategies, or they are possibly adopting different strategies to minimize the risk of backlash. And so maybe women think that they need to be nicer to limit backlash, and men think that they instead need to put workers against each other, have them compete more. Then we have the final piece of this puzzle here is the analysis of backlash. And so we want to look at the chat messages from workers to managers. And so once again, we did this text analysis, and these are the most common types of messages. So they're just simply thanking or joking around, being accepting of the rank. They commit to work hard next. They apologize if they didn't do very well. They are upset. This is very rare. Or they basically question the manager for their ranking decision. We don't see differences except for the likelihood on the messages where there is questioning of the ranking allocation. Okay, so that occurs more often if the manager is a woman. And then there is the angry emojis. So the angry emojis, those are great because we can quantify the backlash by looking at the number of emojis between 0 and 5. Those are the ones that they could send. And so here we are regressing the angry emojis sent to the manager over as a function of the gender of the manager. Then we're thinking of some important characteristics that might matter here. So for example, what we're thinking is that, if you did, or if you think, remember, if you're a worker, you only know your own performance, right? So if you think that you did very well in the task, or say you solved 18, and you are assigned rank B, because that's when you can send the emoji. So you did 18, the manager assigns you rank B. We think that, the higher your performance, the more likely you are to be upset and send a message of disapproval. And the same, if you were stuck in the role, so if you were rank B also before, and now the manager tells you you're rank B again, that might induce you to send more backlash, which is indeed the case. So here we are looking at the number of emojis, again, 0 to 5. What is the difference with this? So this last column is very important because, of course, you might be thinking the male and female managers, we have just seen that they send different messages under backlash, right? So this is the backlash treatment. So we have just seen that they send different kinds of messages. Men are more inducing competition, explaining the rank allocation. Women are more likely to use nice words and be praising and supportive messages. And so you might be thinking maybe these emojis are a response to those kind of different messages. So in the last column, we control for those messages, for those the type of messages, the dummies that we created. So we put that in there. And if anything, what that does is to increase the gender difference in backlash rather than decrease it. And so here it comes out that once we control for the language used by the managers to the workers, female managers get about one more angry emoji as compared to the male manager. So the only other piece of result that I have is the response to the receipt of emojis, right? So suppose that, you know, I say you're rank B, you send me three angry emojis, and then we do the task. And now the next round happens and I have a chance to switch you or to keep you in your rank, right? Condition your relative performance and all the stuff that we control for. So what do I do? Am I more likely or less likely to promote you if you send me emojis in the previous round? So this is what this regression is doing here. So we have the manager is female. So again, we are back at the promotion. So the switching behavior, promoting a rank B worker. The manager is female. These are the angry emojis received. This is a difference in relative performance with the other worker. And then there is the interaction between being a female manager and receiving angry emojis, right? So first of all, you know, this confirms the results that we had seen before, that under backlash, women, female managers are more likely to switch, are more likely to promote rank B worker, right? So that's confirmed here. And this is only one treatment, right? So that's the difference with the other one. So we're just focusing on the backlash treatment. This is the impact of angry emojis here for male managers. And since the male managers don't care, they don't respond at all to receiving emojis, that doesn't affect them in any way. This is relative performance still matters. The better the other worker, the worse the lower your likelihood of being promoted. And then here you have the differential impact for the female managers, that it's not significant, doesn't seem to be a differential impact. However, when we do emojis, when we do the total impact of emojis, if you're a female manager, the impact is significant. So we're doing emojis, so this plus this, the impact is negative and significant, which suggests that female managers are more likely to promote you overall, but less so if they receive angry emojis. So it's kind of off-putting to them. The total impact is still positive. So female managers are still more likely to promote you than male managers if you're rank B, but still less so if they receive angry emojis. So I got to the end of it. I think I'm glad that this was more than an hour long. I always struggle with the 1 hour long seminars with this paper. But this is just a summary of what I went through: the self-selection results, the performance results, communication results, and the backlash results. And so I'll be happy to hear your comments or more questions. And here is my email. If you have something that you would like to send me, or a related study, whatever, please send me an email. Thank you.
Daniela, I was curious about one thing. I know that's not what you're looking at, but does the behavior of the workers vary by gender? So have you looked at it, or?
We can. So that's another thing that we might have, we would need more data for that, because as I was saying, since we were trying to simulate this male-dominated environment, right? We don't have enough variation in the gender of the workers, especially when matched with a female manager, right? So if for male managers, we would be able to look at male and female workers, but we don't have enough. We don't have enough power to do that kind of analysis that you're thinking of, which is, to male or female workers and more or less backlash to male or female managers, kind of a gender match kind of thing. So there was not really the, yes, as you said, you know, we saw this as the first, you know, kind of a diagnostic of the problem and how the possibility of backlash matters for women in particular, decision to become managers and what they do when they become managers. But I agree that lots of other dimensions and, you know, the backlash of women and that is also important to study if we want to think of solutions of the problems, which we are not, as I said, it's just diagnostic. But if we want to start thinking, you know, what can be done, and if maybe backlash is higher, is more likely from male workers, maybe, you know, maybe there is a change coming from the bottom up, or having more women at the bottom actually can also benefit the likelihood of wanting to select. But again, it goes into the issue of the gender composition, and with this data we can't do that analysis. It would be interesting too.
Okay, thank you.
Do you find, sorry, go on.
No, go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
So do you find any results in terms of whether the female managers are good for female workers or not? Like, there has been some literature on that recently.
No, that's the same question. So I just say that we don't have enough variation in the gender of the workers, because by design we wanted to have more men than women in the study. And so once you have, if female managers are mostly matched with male workers, so we don't have enough. You know, that would require a different kind of experiment where you randomize specifically the gender composition of the group. You assign the managerial position maybe, and then you change, you vary specifically number of men or women, or, you know, have equal balance among the workforce, and see how that would change the behavior of the managers in the presence or absence of backlash. But we can't do that.
So then I can go back to I think what Farzana had probably asked. So in terms of industries or areas and you know, particular sectors, there are even firms. There must be some firms where the structure is such that, you know, these kind of the way the feedback, I mean, I look at the backlash as some sort of feedback, which is not a nice in its way. That there are some where decisions require, you know, that there is a process where this feedback happens, and others which are more kind of almost algorithmic in the way rankings are done and promotions are done. Do you have any sense of whether, you know, there are organizational structures that, you know, that differ to some extent in the way that these things happen, to just see, you know, whether this kind of carries to general trends? I'm not meaning it as a causal framework, but as just, you know, that has implications on whether there is variation in the way women rise in some sectors vis-a-vis others.
I don't know. I haven't thought about looking for data or any kind of existing data that shows the presence of women in a managerial position, condition on the organizational structure and the requirement of giving feedback more or less regularly. So I don't really know, to be perfectly honest.
And the idea of the length of the repeated transaction. So, you know, are there industries where you have people who do kind of, you know, kind of one period kind of simulated one period kind of output, and you have to, in some sense, give them a bonus or something like that, vis-a-vis organizations where, you know, there are workers that are tied to firms that go through. So you should observe, you know, in the same coin, less women in these kind of setups, right? Whereas there are setups where you are kind of a manager, there are kind of anonymous agents who come, who do something, you evaluate them, and then they go away, right? So in your case, it would seem that the repeated setting actually has an important role to play, because it works through the feedback, right?
At least in our, we are amplifying. I mean, I don't know if, I mean, obviously, I cannot answer with my data in this setting. I don't know if it was one shot, if we would still have an impact of the possibility of backlash. I do not know. We did it repeated to simulate because we believe that in repeated settings it is more likely to matter, right? And so it's more likely to be there. But it's also possible that even the one shot might matter. I'm just thinking, student evaluations, and the first times I thought and I had these bad evaluations, it was a tragedy for me. And I was, for 3 days, I kept thinking about this bad feedback from these students who most likely I would never see again or have in my classes again. And so it was just a one shot, and it was like negative feedback. And, so if there is the underlying question here is, which also we cannot answer with this study, is the mechanism and the reason why we see this. Is it because women are more sensitive? Going back to my first slide, is it because for any backlash, women respond more negatively, or they're affected more negatively by it? Or is it because they receive more backlash? It's just a quantity thing. And so it's not that they are more sensitive, it's just that they receive more of it, they expect more of it. And so that's what is keeping them away. If it is, just that women are more sensitive to backlash than even in a one-shot setting, we might see a similar thing. But if it is about the quantity, then you're absolutely right. Your intuition and the idea of certain industries, certain managerial organizations, a way of operating where you have to give feedback every day or every week. I'm thinking of the tech industry. My understanding is that you have a meeting every day with your team, and you constantly. And so in that case, that I don't know if that's what you're thinking about as
my suggestion was in that vein, that to separate out being, because one has a strong policy impact. The second one, being overly sensitive or something like that, I know that could be a qualification to be a manager. You could interpret it like that too. So, it's harder policy-wise handle. I mean, even if you stop communication, there'll be passive aggressive stance, so on and so forth. It's very difficult to stop feedback from coming in some way or the other. Whereas if it's this nature of interaction, which in many gender studies is important in some sense, right? So then there may be some better policy handles to get around that.
No, definitely. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, that's something to look into, I guess. I mean, I'm not sure how. It's obviously, it would just be correlational, just to see, what's the presence of women in managerial positions in certain kind of job versus others. So it wouldn't be anything, but it would definitely be an indication,
right?
That what we're saying resonates with firms, organizations.
I mean, if you find evidence for it, it might kind of give a interesting kind of twist to it in terms of what one can do about it, right? So
no, and definitely, there are spin-offs. There are lots of things that could be done. I mean, as I said, I really see this as the first kind of diagnostic, one of the papers that kind of identify the problem. But then the next step, I think, for us, for anybody who wants to work on this issue, is to try and think what could be done, like how could this be addressed as a problem. And what you're suggesting is definitely a way forward, working in the frequency of these reports, or like having different organizational structures that allow for less backlash to happen.
Yeah, on that note, let me thank Dhanila. I think we came up with a lot of interesting topics for future research, as Dhanila has pointed out, and I think that would be very useful for a lot of students who are listening here. Many of our students, I think there are at least 2 or 3 offshoots here that one could think of in terms of designing experiments, and Dhanila has given her email address. So any one of you is interested in contacting her and talking about this further, please do so. So thank you so much, Dhanila. That was extremely interesting and very stimulating. And I know it's very late for you now.
Yes.
So thank you so much for presenting and for the very
Thank you all for the engaging conversation.